Have you ever wondered why some stories from the past are never fully told? The Titanic, one of the most iconic disasters in history, is wrapped in mystery, sorrow, and unanswered questions. Most of us know the basics. A massive luxury ship hit an iceberg on its maiden voyage and sank into the freezing waters of the North Atlantic. Over 1,500 people lost their lives. But what if I told you that there's more to this story, more that historians often leave out? Close your eyes for a moment and imagine standing on the deck of the Titanic on the night of April 14, 1912. The stars are bright above, the sea is calm, and the cold air bites at your skin. You're surrounded by elegance, men in tuxedos, women in silk gowns, music floating softly through the night. No one knows that within a few hours, this beauty will turn into horror. That peaceful sea will swallow the pride of human engineering and countless dreams. Most documentaries and books focus on the ship's construction, the iceberg, and the tragic ending. But what they don't often tell you is what was going on behind the scenes. The Titanic was more than a ship, it was a symbol of human pride, a floating city of power and luxury. But behind its grandeur were decisions, secrets, and overlooked warnings that may have sealed its fate long before it ever touched water. Let's talk about one such warning. Just hours before the iceberg collision, the Titanic had received multiple messages from nearby ships about dangerous icebergs in the area. These messages were urgent, clear, and direct. But did you know that they were ignored? The wireless operators on board, overwhelmed with personal messages from wealthy passengers, reportedly brushed off these warnings. One message from the SS Californian was even interrupted and dismissed. The focus wasn't safety, it was service. And that silence cost lives. Even more haunting is the story of the SS Californian itself. This ship was not far from the Titanic, close enough to possibly rescue many of those who died. Its crew saw strange lights in the distance that night, and some even claimed to see distress rockets. But the ship's captain, Stanley Lord, chose not to act. He believed the ship in the distance was not in trouble, and he went back to bed. Imagine being that close to saving hundreds of lives, and doing nothing. Why didn't historians push harder on this mystery? Was it fear of blame? Or something deeper? Then there's the question of the lifeboats. The Titanic was carrying just 20 lifeboats, far fewer than needed for the 2,200 people on board. But did you know it wasn't even required by law to carry more? Regulations were outdated and based on the size of the ship, not the number of passengers. And what's worse, some lifeboats weren't even filled to capacity when they were lowered into the water. In the chaos and fear, many seats went empty, seats that could have saved lives. That's a painful truth many history books gloss over. Now, let's talk about the passengers, especially those in third class. These were everyday people, many of them immigrants chasing a dream, leaving everything behind for a better life in America. They were placed in the lower decks, far from the luxury and comfort of first class. But when the ship started to sink, it wasn't just the distance from the lifeboats that sealed their fate. It was the locked gates. Yes, locked gates. Reports and survivor testimonies suggest that gates were shut, keeping third-class passengers from reaching the upper decks in time. Some of them fought to climb up, others banged on doors, screamed, begged, but help never came. They were left behind, and many died without even having a chance to fight for their lives. That's a side of the Titanic tragedy we don't hear enough about, not just a sinking ship, but a cruel hierarchy where the poor were the first to perish. And what about the ship's design itself? Historians praise the Titanic's structure, calling it unsinkable, but the reality is more complex. The ship was indeed a marvel of engineering, but some decisions made during construction may have doomed it. For example, cheaper iron rivets were used in certain parts of the hull. These rivets were more likely to snap under pressure, and many believe that when the Titanic hit the iceberg, these weak points allowed water to flood the compartments more quickly. It wasn't just an accident, it was a chain of cost-cutting choices made long before the voyage began. There's also the unsettling story of the coal fire. Few people know that a fire had been burning in one of the coal bunkers before the Titanic even left the port. This fire weakened part of the ship's structure, especially the bulkhead near where the iceberg struck. Some experts believe the fire contributed to the speed and scale of the flooding. But this information was buried, ignored by officials who didn't want to delay the voyage or damage the ship's perfect image. How many lives could have been saved if the fire had been taken seriously? And while the Titanic sank into the icy sea, there were acts of incredible courage and love that rarely get told. A band of musicians, instead of saving themselves, chose to play music to calm the passengers. They played until the very end, their songs echoing into the darkness as the ship slipped beneath the waves. Husbands kissed their wives goodbye and stepped back so others could live. Mothers clutched their children, whispering words of comfort even as fear consumed them. These moments of raw humanity, of pain and beauty intertwined, deserve more than just a footnote. But perhaps the most chilling part is what happened after. The White Star Line, the company behind the Titanic, quickly tried to cover up its mistakes. Survivors were told to stay quiet. Families were paid off. Investigations were rushed, and blame was scattered thin. The world moved on. But for the families left behind, the pain never faded. And for the many voices never heard, the crew, the third-class passengers, the heroes who died unnamed, the silence was even louder. The Titanic was not just a ship that sank. It was a lesson about arrogance, inequality, and how easily truth can be buried. It reminds us that history is often written by those in power, and what they choose to leave out can be just as important as what they include. So the next time you hear about the Titanic, remember this: the iceberg didn't just strike steel, it struck humanity. And in the cold, dark waters of that night, more than lives were lost. Secrets drowned too. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, if it made you think differently about what you thought you knew, then share it. Because the truth, no matter how long it's been underwater, always deserves to rise again.